In the year 331 BC, the stage was set for one of history's most defining battles. On the plains of Gaugamela, a confrontation between two empires would change the course of history and pave the way for the rise of one of the greatest conquerors the world has ever seen. This was no ordinary battle. It was a contest of brilliant strategy, daring tactics, and sheer determination. At the heart of this epic clash stood Alexander the Great, King of Macedonia, who had already achieved remarkable successes. With his forces, he had stormed through Syria, Phoenicia, Palestine, and Egypt, leaving behind a trail of victories that made him a legend in his time. But now, he was on the verge of the ultimate confrontation, facing Darius III of Persia, whose empire spanned from Greece to India. Darius had already assembled an enormous army to stop Alexander's relentless advance. However, despite having fewer men, Alexander was armed with something far more powerful: superior discipline, cutting-edge military technology, and a command structure that was second to none. The months leading up to the battle were filled with tension. While winter settled over the campaign, both armies were quietly preparing for the decisive clash. Darius knew he had to stop Alexander before his forces reached the heart of the Persian Empire. Alexander, on the other hand, knew that this battle would determine the future of his conquests. It was a moment of destiny, and every move had to be calculated. While Alexander's army was smaller, it was elite. Macedonian soldiers were known for their precision and their ability to execute complex maneuvers under pressure. They had heavy cavalry, the famed companion cavalry, and a highly disciplined phalanx that could hold the line against overwhelming numbers. Darius, in contrast, commanded a far larger force, drawn from across the vast Persian Empire. He had cavalry, infantry, and war elephants. He had everything in his arsenal. But Darius' forces were also more diverse and, at times, less disciplined. The key to victory would lie in leadership, strategy, and the ability to exploit weaknesses. As Alexander advanced through the Persian Empire, he encountered minimal resistance. The Greek rebellion was still a problem, but Antipater, one of his most trusted generals, was left behind to handle that. Alexander's focus remained on the heart of the Persian Empire. By the time he crossed the Euphrates River, his army was in position to strike at the very foundation of Darius' power. He made sure his forces were well prepared, with Hephaestion overseeing the construction of vital bridges to ensure smooth crossings. But Darius wasn't sitting idly by. His satrap Macedonia, a key figure in the Persian military, was keeping a watchful eye on Alexander's movements. While he could not stop the Macedonian forces from crossing the river, he was tasked with gathering intelligence and reporting back to Darius. This gave Darius the opportunity to move his own forces, positioning them near the Tigris River in preparation for battle. The Persian king, remembering the successes of past battles, planned to repeat the tactics that had worked for him before. He chose a battlefield near Gaugamela, a vast plain that would allow his numerically superior forces to extend in a wide formation. He hoped that this open space would give him the advantage, and he ordered his forces to flatten the terrain, making it more suitable for cavalry. Darius was not about to give up without a fight. He had been humiliated by Alexander before, and this time he was determined to crush the Macedonian threat once and for all. Meanwhile, Alexander was moving strategically, trying to outmaneuver Darius. He knew that the Mesopotamian heat could be unbearable, so he diverted his army to the north, where cooler temperatures would give his men a much-needed respite. This also kept the Persian forces guessing. It was a careful game of cat and mouse, each side trying to anticipate the other's moves. When Macedonia finally reported that Darius had moved his forces to Arbela, Alexander knew the time for decisive action had come. His scouts had confirmed that Darius' army was positioned near the Tigris, and estimates suggested that the Persian forces were far larger than his own. But Alexander was undeterred. He had faced overwhelming odds before and had always emerged victorious. The size of the enemy army didn't matter. What mattered was the strategy. Upon reaching the Tigris River, Alexander found that Darius' army was indeed close by, but Darius was nowhere to be seen. Despite this, Alexander pressed on, crossing the river and setting up camp. His men rested, and the stage was set for the battle of a lifetime. Darius, aware of Alexander's movements, had taken up position near Gaugamela. He was ready to face the Macedonian king, and the battlefield was prepared. The ground was flattened, and his forces were in position. The Persian king, however, had underestimated Alexander's ability to adapt. The Macedonian king knew exactly what he was up against, and he had a plan in mind. As night fell, Alexander decided not to engage in a risky night attack. Instead, he chose to rest his troops, knowing that they would need all their strength for the battle ahead. Meanwhile, Darius' men spent the night in battle formation, a decision that would prove to be disastrous. Exhausted and demoralized, the Persian troops were ill-prepared for the conflict that awaited them. The next morning, as the sun rose, Alexander and his army were ready. His forces were well-rested, and their discipline was unmatched. Darius' men, on the other hand, were tired and nervous. Alexander's scouts had done their job, and they confirmed that Darius' forces were indeed formidable. However, the Persians had one major disadvantage. They lacked the ability to properly coordinate their massive numbers. As the battle began, the difference in strategy became apparent. Darius' army, much larger than Alexander's, extended far beyond the Macedonian flanks. He had a wide array of cavalry and wore elephants at his disposal, and he attempted to use these advantages to surround Alexander's forces. But Alexander was prepared. His army was highly disciplined and expertly organized to avoid being encircled. The Macedonian phalanx held its ground while the companion cavalry made quick, devastating strikes against the Persian flanks. The battle was brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. But Alexander's strategy proved superior. He focused on the Persian left, using his cavalry to create openings and press the advantage. The key moment came when Alexander led a daring charge straight into the heart of Darius' forces. This bold move destabilized the Persian lines, and the morale of Darius' army began to crumble. Darius, realizing that his forces were losing, fled the battlefield, leaving his men to be slaughtered. With Darius' retreat, the Persian Empire was left in disarray. Gaugamela was a victory of unparalleled significance, not just for Alexander, but for history. It marked the beginning of the end for Persia as an empire. With the Persian king on the run, Alexander's forces swept through the heart of the Persian Empire, ultimately leading to the collapse of one of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient world. Alexander's victory at Gaugamela would not only solidify his place in history, but also change the course of the ancient world forever. It was a battle that destroyed Persia and paved the way for the rise of a new empire, one that would stretch from Greece to India. The Battle of Gaugamela was not just a military victory. It was the moment that sealed Alexander's legacy as one of history's greatest conquerors.